I was just a little girl when the silence began. My name is Ella, and I grew up in a small town called Hollow Creek, a place where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. The kind of town where the sound of church bells echoed across the valley, and the smell of fresh-cut grass filled the air in the summer. It was beautiful, serene, and suffocating. At least it felt suffocating when I was inside our old creaky house at the end of Maple Street. The house was large, older than I was, with rooms that always felt colder than they should have been. The hardwood floors groaned when you walked, like they were echoing the tension that filled every corner of the house. My father, Mark, was a man of few words, but his words, when they did come, were thunderous. When he raised his voice, it rattled the walls. My mother, Rachel, was soft-spoken, her eyes tired, as though life had worn her down long before I ever understood what pain was. I was only 7 when I first felt it, the weight of the silence. My father's anger would come without warning, like a storm on the horizon. Sometimes it was over something small, a forgotten chore or a spilled glass of milk. Other times it was over nothing at all. But after every outburst, there was silence. A silence that wrapped around our house like a thick fog. I learned early to hide away and disappear into the shadows. One afternoon, I was sitting in the kitchen, the blue paint on the walls faded. My mother was washing dishes, and my father was sitting at the kitchen table. I could hear the hum of the fridge, but it wasn't peaceful. It was like waiting for a bomb to drop. And then it happened. Something as trivial as burnt toast. My father's voice, loud and sharp, sliced through the quiet. "How many times do I have to tell you?" His words were filled with frustration, his tone a force that sent shivers down my spine. My mother apologized, as she always did, but I saw the hurt in her eyes. And that was when I started to believe that something was wrong with me too, that I must have been the cause of all the anger, that I wasn't enough. School became my escape, though I never truly escaped. Mrs. Benson, my third-grade teacher, had an infectious smile, and her warm hugs were the only comfort I seemed to know. She would greet me with such kindness, asking how my day was going. I would smile back, lying, telling her everything was fine, even though my stomach twisted every time I stepped into my home. I didn't know how to explain it, not even to myself. I became a master at hiding my feelings, burying them deep inside. By the time I was 16, I was good at pretending. I would laugh with friends at the diner after school, pretending everything was normal, like the deep ache in my chest didn't exist. I had convinced myself that if I smiled enough, maybe the silence at home wouldn't hurt so much. But it did. Every time I stepped through the door of that house, I could feel it, the oppressive silence, the weight of years of unspoken words, and the tension that never seemed to leave. By the time I left for college at 18, I thought I could leave it all behind. I moved to Bridgewood, a small city about 2 hours away, full of promise and new beginnings. The campus was beautiful, tall trees lining the pathways, the air smelling of fresh rain and books. But no matter how far I ran, the silence followed me. I remember my first night in my tiny dorm room, feeling completely alone. My father's angry outbursts still echoed in my mind. The shame and fear were still with me. Then I met Lily, who lived across the hall. She was kind and always knew when something was wrong. One day she sat next to me in silence. I finally spoke, sharing my story. Lily just listened, and for the first time, I felt seen. That night, I made an appointment with a therapist, someone who could help me untangle the mess inside my head. It wasn't easy. Therapy felt like reopening wounds I didn't even know I had, but it was the beginning of something important. It was the beginning of me learning to speak the words that had been buried deep inside for so many years. I had spent my entire life believing I wasn't worthy of love, that my silence was my punishment. But with every session, I began to realize something that would change everything. I was allowed to take up space. I was allowed to be angry, to be hurt, to heal. I began to forgive myself. For years, I had blamed myself for my father's anger, for my mother's inability to protect me. But as I worked through the pain, I understood that I wasn't the cause. I wasn't broken, and I wasn't responsible for the actions of others. I was allowed to heal on my own terms. There were still moments when the silence crept back in, when I would hear my father's voice in my mind. But I knew now that I didn't have to live there anymore. The past didn't define me. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I was strong. I was healing. Today, I'm 23, living in a small apartment in Riverdale. The walls here are painted in warm shades of yellow, and the windows let in the sunlight. It's a silence I've learned to embrace. And when I close my eyes, I can hear the laughter of friends who have stood by me. I know now that I'm worthy of love, I'm worthy of peace, and I no longer carry the silence of my past. I carry the strength of my survival.